So now we continue on with this story from Odon. Hello, Odon. Good to have you back. This is great that you are giving us the time, the energy, and the space to really unpack what you how you see the Quran was formed. And what you're going to be doing now is you're going to be looking at the Quran itself. So you're going to take the Quran as it is, and you're going to see what the Quran tells us concerning how it was created. Let the Quran speak is basically what you're saying. We've always asked this. We want people, and we've said this over and over again, go to the evidence that is there. Let's go to the evidence on the ground. Well, we've got the Quran in our hands. Let's open its pages. Let's read what it says. Let's see what it says concerning how it was put together and where it was derived. So over to you. Help us with this. Unpack the Quran for us and tell us what it's telling us.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, this is the second part of our Quranic study about the word Quran and the Arabic root QRA in the Quranic text. We already had a first session, a first part of this Quranic study, and we found evidence in the Quranic text that the Quranic text, Qur'an, the Qur'an that we find in the Quranic text is not the Islamic Qur'an. It is another book. We saw that there were many Qur'ans, different Qur'ans at the time of the Quranic proclamations during the 7th century. And we saw that the Quranic proclamations aimed at introducing a new Quran, which is the Quranic text Quran. So, and we also saw that this new Quran had something special. It was an Arabic Quran, which meant that the other Qurans that we read about in the Quranic text were not Arabic Qurans, but foreign language, foreign Qurans, and I think there were Aramaic Qurans. And an Aramaic Quran, as we saw, is a Keriana or a Korono, which is a religious lectionary, a book which is a collection of sacred scriptures to be used in liturgy, in mass, or for the prayer. And now we will see that the Quranic text gives us evidence that the Quran, the Arabic Quran, was already written at the time of the proclamations. This is very important because in the standard Islamic narrative, which is all about explaining us how the Islamic Quran was written and came to us, it is explained that the Islamic Quran is the Quran that we find in the Quranic text. Every time that we read Quran in the Quranic text, according to the standard Islamic narrative, it is supposed to be the Islamic Quran. And this Islamic Quran was written all along the time during which Muhammad preached. But we see that in the Quranic text tells us that it was already written. So it cannot be the Islamic Quran. And this is the first part of the little Quranic study I will try to unpack here. The best thing will be to jump to the presentation and to read the verses. So let me share my screen. So in the Quranic text, we saw evidence that the Arabic lectionary we discovered, the Quranic text Quran, was already written, was already done and finished at the time of the Quranic proclamation. For example, in Surah 41, verse 26, do not listen to this Quran.
Let me just interject here. What do you mean by proclamations? I think some of your hearers will be confused. I'm a little confused. When you say proclamations, this is when it's the readings, this is when it's the teaching, this is when the preachers are preaching. What do you mean by that?
When we read the Quran, the Islamic Quran, we see that most of its text is kind of a preaching. It has been preached before. We see a preacher preaching or someone speaking. It can be a preacher. The Muslims think it is God. But this is what I call the proclamations. The Quran was written out of exhortations, homilies, proclamations, mostly.
So just so I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying really is that these, before it was written in a text as the Quran that we have today, it was proclaimed, it was preached. There are homilies, lectionaries, and hymns that existed, and they were oral. These were oral proclamations. Those oral proclamations then got written down. So we're talking about the time before it gets written down in a codified text.
And here, this is what the standard Islamic narrative explains. The standard Islamic narrative explains that the Quran was written out of the proclamations of Muhammad, but it is also what we can gather just by what we can find, just by reading the text. When we read the text, we see that mostly it is made of proclamations of people speaking to other people.
Okay. Odon, the reason why this becomes very important then is this assumes, therefore, that there is no eternal text that has always existed. You're confronting that right now. You realize that, and you're also confronting the standard Islamic narrative's view of untouched or no human interventions, accretions, or deletions. You're confronting that notion as well by saying what you've just said.
In a sense, but you see, when you look at the text in a scholarly way, in an academic, a scientific way, you find just what I said, that the text is mostly about the writing of an oral and oracular proclamation. We see someone or maybe several people speaking to others, telling that they should not, for example, eat pork, or that they should do this or not do this, or a preacher explaining the story of Joseph, or you see all the Quranic stories. Mostly the Quranic text is made out of these proclamations, what I call proclamations. There are other kinds of text, other literary genres, which we spoke about in our previous video. Like I said, the Quran is not a book, but a corpus, a collection of different types of texts. Some are oral, oracular proclamations, but others could have come from a written tradition. For example, the short surahs, the apocalyptical surahs from the end of the Quran could have come from a writing process and not from an orality process, a proclamation. But those are hypotheses, scholars have hypotheses. And what I intend to do now is, by looking at the Quranic text, by doing an exegesis of the Quran word, the Q-R-A Arabic root in the Quran, is gathering evidence of what the Quran in the Quranic text is. And particularly here, we will see that this Arabic lectionary, because this is what we already established before, was written at the time of the oral proclamation of the preacher. So the preacher could be Muhammad according to the standard Islamic narrative, or other people that we don't know about. This is what the what the scholars will unveil. So let's go back to the Quranic text and see. We see that in Surah 41, verse 26, someone is speaking about the Arabic lectionary as being something already finished, already written, already done at the time of the proclamation. This is what we can make out of this verse. Do not listen to this Quran and speak noisily during its recitation. One could not speak like this if the Quran was not already finished. And it is the same in Surah 47, verse 24. Then do they not reflect upon the Quran, or are there locks upon their hearts? So the Quran is something that is already done here. Otherwise, this verse would not make sense. In Surah 50, verse 1, we are talking about an honored Quran. So something that is already existing, that is already written, that is already there. Again, in Surah 55, at the beginning, verse 1 and 2, the most merciful, he taught the Quran. So the Quran already exists, or otherwise it could not have been taught. In Surah 73, verse 20, so recite what is easy for you of the Quran. Again, the Quran is presented here as something that already exists, that is already written. And if we had made it a non-Arabic Quran, in Surah 41, verse 34, when we use the past tense like this, we had made it a non-Arabic Quran. It tells us that the Quran is already made. And the last verse I want to point out is in Surah 42, verse 7. And thus we have sent down to you an Arabic Quran. So here again, the Quran is an existing book or an existing recitation. It is already done. It is already finished. It is not the work in process that the standard Islamic narrative tells us about the Islamic Quran. And so we see that the Quranic text Quran, the Arabic lectionary, already existed at the time of the Quranic proclamations. And so it cannot be the Islamic Quran. It is another book. Because the Islamic Quran, the Muslim had to wait until Muhammad died to write the Quran, to write the Islamic Quran, because they had to wait until the last words of Muhammad, the last proclamations of Muhammad to write the Islamic Quran. But in the text, we find that the Quran, the so-called Quran of the Quranic text, already existed. So it cannot be the Islamic Quran. It is another book. And what is this book exactly? We already saw that it was an Arabic lectionary, and we have evidence again in the Quranic text that this Arabic lectionary, this Quranic text Quran, was a lectionary of previous sacred scriptures. In Surah 10, verse 37, it is written, and it was not for this Quran to be produced by other than God, but it is a confirmation of what was before it, and a detailed explanation of the book about which there is no doubt. And here we have the word in Arabic, kitab. Kitab, we translate it with the word book, but it is not really a book per se. Kitab means scripture, what has been written down. And so here we see that the Quran in the Quranic text explains what is in another book, another kitab. And this kitab is something very special, very particular. It is the kitab about which there is no doubt. What is this kitab? What are those scriptures? They are from the Lord of the worlds. What scripture existed in the 7th century that were supposed to be from the Lord of the worlds in the Middle East? There were maybe the Zoroastrian scriptures, the Avesta, for example. There were the Bible, of course. the Gospels and the Torah and the prophets and the Psalms and so on. And so here, if we look at the text for just for what it says, without the Islamic narrative telling us that it is about a book which is on a sacred tablet by God and so on, one could guess that the Quran is a detailed explanation of the sacred scriptures of the 7th century. And I think it is about the Bible. And we will see that in many other verses of the text, it is the same. In Surah 12, at the beginning, from verse 1 to 3, Alif Lam Ra, these are the verses of the explicit book. What is the explicit scripture at the time? The verse gives us the answers. The verse gives us the answer because it is just here, written down for everyone to see. We have sent down a lectionary in Arabic that you may understand. We read to you the best of story, and the best of stories is the story of Joseph. It is the story that we find in the Bible. And here we understand what the Quran is about, what the Quranic text is about. Here we have someone featuring an Arabic lectionary which presents the best of stories from the Bible. And here it is about the story of Joseph that we find in the Bible. And in the following verses, in Surah 12, we will have the story of Joseph. Someone commenting the story of Joseph, the biblical Joseph, and telling his Arab audience about it. Another verse in Surah 15, verse 1, these are the verses of the scripture, the book, the kitab, and a clear Quran. So here we have a preacher telling his audience that the verses of the scripture that he is about to tell his audience in the following verses are kind of the same that the one that we can find in the clear Quran, the Arabic lectionary. Again, we have here evidence that the Arabic lectionary, the clear Quran, featured the verses of the Kitab, of the scripture of the 7th century, the sacred scriptures of the 7th century in the Middle East. In Surah 27, verse 1, again, it's almost the same. These are the verses of the Quran and of a clear book, a clear scripture. The same explanation. The Quran, the Arabic lectionary, is kind of the same. It features the same verses that than the one we find in the clear scripture, the Bible. It is, what is the scripture? In Surah 41, verse 3, a book whose verses have been detailed, an Arabic Quran for people who know. Again, here we have evidence that the Arabic Quran, the Arabic lectionary, is a collection of verses from a previous sacred scripture, a previous kitab, and I think it is the Bible. And here we have the hardest evidence of all the evidence we can find in the Quranic text. By the explicit scripture, the clear scripture, it's the same word, clear and explicit, we have made it an Arabic lectionary for you to reason. It is taken from the mother scripture with us, sublime and full of wisdom. So what is the Arabic lectionary? It is something which is made out of the clear kitab, and it is taken from the mother kitab, al-Kitab. And here we have the Arabic preposition fi. Fi is usually translated by in. it is taken in the mother scripture. But this Arabic word has the meaning of from in it. When you ask Arabic speakers, you see that the fi carries always the notion of a container, something that is from something. It is not in here, it is from. So it is taken from the mother scripture. Al-Kitab, with us sublime and full of wisdom. And what is the mother scripture? What is Al-Kitab, the mother of scripture? We have an explanation here in the Surah 56, verse 77 to 79. Indeed, it is surely a noble Quran, a noble Arabic lectionary, taken from, and again with the same Arabic word fi, taken from a scripture well guarded, none touch it except the purified. And Jay, do you know who has to purify before touching a certain sacred scripture? Of course, it is the Torah. According to Judaism, you cannot touch the Torah if you are not purified. And I think we have here evidence that the Arabic lectionary, the Quran that we find in the Quranic text, was a lectionary of the Torah and maybe of the Gospels also. It was a lectionary of previous sacred scriptures that existing at the time of the 7th century. It was an Arabic lectionary made from excerpts of the Bible, of the sacred scripture, Torah, Gospel, and maybe other texts. And so it is not to be confused with the Islamic Quran. We have here clear evidence that the Quran word in the Quranic text is not the Islamic Quran, it is something else, it is another book. And thanks to our study, we are now starting to understand what this other book is, an Arabic lectionary, which was a collection of sacred of verses taken from what was considered at the time the sacred scriptures, the Torah, the Gospels, and maybe other books, other religious books. But let's go on with our Quranic study, and we will see that in the Quranic text, we have also evidence that this Arabic lectionary was being taught to the preachers by some unknown teachers. In Surah 10, verse 94, so if you are in doubt about that which we have taught to you, revealed, but it is a kind of the same word as taught, then ask those who has been reading the scripture before you. So who is this we here? Who has taught something to the one that is preaching? Here we have maybe I think so, it is about a teacher teaching a preacher and telling him, if you don't know, if you have questions, ask the people who have been reading the scripture before you. If you have a question about our teaching, ask the Jews, or ask maybe the people who have been reading the scripture before you are the people who are teaching the preacher. So who are they? This is the question. In Surah 41, verse 34, and if we have made it a non-Arabic Quran, they would have said, why are its verses not explained in detail in our language? Is it a foreign recitation and an Arab preacher? Who is speaking here? This is not the preacher speaking here. This is someone else. This is not the preacher telling the Arab audience. This is, I think, the teachers telling the preacher about their own doctrine. The teacher were the one who translated an Aramaic Qur'an, a foreign Qur'an, into an Arabic Qur'an. And they gave it to the preacher to teach, in order for him to teach the Arab audience, in order for him to present it to the Arab audience. This is what we find here in this verse. In Surah 15, I have here a few verses, 87, 90, 94. We have certainly given you 7 of the repeated or 7 of the repetitions of the great Qur'an. There is a great Qur'an, and it is being taught by someone or by some people to the preacher. They have certainly given the preacher 7 of the repetitions of the great Qur'an, 7 of the passages of the great Qur'an. Just as we descended those who separated, those who have made the Qur'an into portions, so proclaim of what you are commanded and turn away from the associationists. Here we have the teachers telling the preacher what their teaching is about. And I think it is so clear and evident, but the thing is, people mostly read the Quran with the standard Islamic narrative glasses on their nose, and they don't see the evidence hidden in plain sight. In Surah 75, verse 16 to 19, we have some instructions given by the teachers to the preacher. Do not move not your tongue with it to hasten with it. You will not hasten. It is about the day of judgment here. You will not hasten the day of judgment by preaching it faster, preaching it again and again. Indeed, upon us is its collection, the gathering of the verses from the sacred scriptures into the Arabic lectionary, and its recitation in the Quran. So when we have recited it to you, then follow its recitation, then upon us is its clarification, its explanation. This is the literal meaning of the Quranic text here. Some people will tell me it is not what we find in the Islamically correct translation, but it is the literal meaning of the Arabic text. And in this text, what we find, again, evidence that there were teachers who taught the preachers the Arabic lectionary. And here we have a sort of compte rendu, a sort of a debrief of the teaching lesson, of the lessons that they were they were making for the preachers. And in the Surah 76, verse 23 to 24, indeed, it is we who have sent down to you. Sent down is a bit like taught. We have taught to you the Quran progressively. So be patient for the command of your master, of your rabbi. It is the Arabic word rab here, which is the same as rabbi, master. And do not obey from among them a sinner or a coverer. It is the KFR root, which we already spoke about in previous videos about the coverers, the misbelievers, as being the rabbinical Jews. So here again, we have a teacher telling his student what he should do. He has to be patient for the command of his master, of his teacher. He has to obey him and not obey the sinners, not obey the rabbinical Jews. Why? Because the teachers, the masters, are the ones who know the Quran, who know the Arabic lectionary, and who teach the Arabic lectionary to the preacher. And I think we have here evidence that this Arabic lectionary was taught to the preacher by some teachers. So who were those teachers? This is the question here. I have here other verses apart from the Quran occurrences, apart from the QRA Arabic root, showing evidence of the existence of the Arabic lectionary and its teaching process. Those are very well-known verses, but when you read it now, once you have understood what I just explained, it becomes very, very clear. In Surah 11, verse 13, they say, he has fabricated it or forged it. Say, then produce 10 surahs like it that have been fabricated and call upon whomever you can beside God if you should be truthful. And now we understand what this means. It means that the preacher who was preaching to the Arab audience, who was proposing them, he was not proposing to them, who was proposing them to adopt the Arabic lectionary, he met reactions, he met opposition. Some people in the Arab audience told him, your Arabic lectionary is crap. We don't want it. You have forged it. It is not from the sacred scripture. It is not from God. And he answered, so you just have to bring me 10 surahs like it, 10 chapters like it, 10 Arabic chapters like it, and we will see, we will judge. The preacher tells his audience, my Arabic lectionary is really taken from the sacred scripture. It is the actual, real translation into Arabic of the Aramaic sacred scriptures. If you want to challenge me, then do your own translation into Arabic, and we will see who is better. We will see which lectionary is better, my Arabic lectionary or your translation. So it is not here about what the standard Islamic narrative says about this divine challenge of making something like the Islamic Quran. It is much more peculiar, much more simple. It is about the Arabic translation of the sacred scriptures that we can find in the Arabic lectionary. In Surah 16, verse 103, and we certainly know what they say, it is only a man who teaches him. The tongue of the one they refer to is foreign, and this is in a clear Arabic language. So here we have evidence that there were at least one teacher or several teachers that were teaching the preacher. And we have also evidence here that those preachers were not Arabs. They spoke a foreign language. Which language was it? I think they spoke Aramaic because it was about translating the sacred scriptures, the Jewish sacred scriptures into Arabic. And so they spoke Aramaic. And here we kind of understand who the teachers were. In Surah 76, verse 23 to 24, we already saw those verses, but I want to give a new explanation here. Indeed, it is we who have sent down to you the Quran progressively. So be patient for the command of your master. Here we now understand completely what it is about. There were some masters. They taught the Arabic lectionary to the preachers. And there was a kind of pact or something. There was something between Aramaic-speaking teachers, Aramaic-speaking masters, and Arabic preachers. And lastly, in Surah 25, verse 4 and verse 6, those who cover, so the rabbinical Jews, say, this is a falsehood. He invented it. And another people, another tribe, another group assisted him in it. But they have committed an injustice and a lie. And they say, tales of the former peoples, which he has written down, and they are dictated to him morning and evening. So here we have an opposition from the rabbinical Jews, who are called coverers, kafirun, to the explanations of the Arabic preacher. And those rabbinical Jews tell that the preacher had the assistance of another group, another people, so someone different from them. We know now that the people, the teachers, the masters who taught the preacher spoke Aramaic. But they, and also that they were Jews. They belonged to the Jewish people. But they were not part of the rabbinical Jews, because the rabbinical Jews here just told that they were another people. So not another group, that they were not part of their group. Also, they talk to the group of the teachers as being the former peoples, the groups from before. So they were something ancient. They belonged to an ancient community. They were not a new community that just emerged in the 7th century. They were an old group. And also here we have evidence that what the preacher is preaching does not come from God, because it is dictated to him morning and evening. Here we have evidence of the teaching process. We have evidence that there were teachers teaching the preachers what to preach. So what can we understand from all of this? That there was a specific group that was a Jewish group, but was not a rabbinical Jewish group, who taught Arab preacher an Arabic lectionary in order for the Arab preachers to present this Arabic lectionary to an Arab audience. I think this group was the Judeo-Nazarenes that we already spoke about, that we also and that we also established their existence thanks to the Quranic text itself. Remember, Jay, we had some videos about the people of the book, Al-Kitab, and the Quranic Nazarenes. And if we link our Quranic study about the Quran to our previous video, I think we can say that the teachers of the preachers were Judeo-Nazarenes, and that the Judeo-Nazarenes were the one who translated an Aramaic lectionary into Arabic, and that they taught some people, some Arabs, to how to preach this Arabic lectionary to the Arab audience, and that those preachers became the apostles of the Judeo-Nazarenes to the Arab audience. They were the envoys of the Judeo-Nazarenes to the Arab audience. Envoy in Arabic is Rasul. And they were not so. Rasul, I think, does not mean God's envoy in some cases, but the Judeo-Nazarenes envoy. I think we should finish our Quranic study here. because what we just established is groundbreaking enough, I think, for our audience. And we will see in another part what we can make out of all of this and how, thanks to this new evidence, how we can fathom the emerging process of the Islamic Quran. Because we have now established that the Quranic text Quran, the Quran word, the Quran that we find in the Quranic text is not the Islamic Quran. And so, what is the Islamic Quran? And this is a question we will answer in another video.
Well, this is good. Now, what you have done here, this is interesting because you're looking at the Quran itself. You're opening up the Quran and saying, what does the Quran tell us? Where does it claim it derives its material from? And you've done a good job of going through reference after reference. You gave us a lot of references here, and they all are referring to something in the past tense, which means these are things that have already happened. These are material that is already exists. You talked about chapter 46, chapter 47, chapter 50, 55, chapter 73. You went on to get a whole litany of reference after reference after reference about a previously existing text. Previously means it happens before. Another book, another collection, a previous scripture in chapter 10, verse 39. You refer and you specified, we're going to, that this is not just any text, it is the kitab. Kitab, as you are defining it, is a scripture. That means it's a religious text. They talk about another text in chapter 10, verse 37, chapter 12, chapter 15, chapter 27, 41, 42, that they are taken from the mother of the kitab. And it's interesting how you took the word fi, which is always in my which always means in, that I've understood it. And I looked it up while you were doing it, and it is in the text that I have, the Hilali and Khan. It has taken in the book, taken in the book. You've put to from a book, and you said this is a better, more correct translation. Thus, it's taken from a previous. From means previously, a previous religious book. Taught, the one that was taught previously. You referred, and these are verses that we know, chapter 10, verse 94, chapter 21, verse 7, 41, verse 44. These are ones that we always have referred to about the previous text. We've always said that that is the Bible itself. You're saying, no, these are lectionaries because we have revealed them to you, we have made them for you, we have given them to you, we have recited it, we have sent down to you. All these we have. This is something that is been prepared for them. These are things that have been given to them, and now they're receiving them. And then you go on to chapter 11, chapter 16, chapter 76. There's so many you gave us, referring to that these that they have been given are now to be made into an Arabic text for the Arabic people. And if you have any doubt, provide me something, 10 verses that can supersede it. This is the claim of create a surah like it that I've always had thrown at me. I had a very famous debate where that happened to me with Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad, where he asked me that very thing. I had no idea now that had I known this at that time, I said, okay, this is these are the ones that is referring to. Those references to produce a surah like it actually is saying something that can be equal, if you in Arabic, to what we have been giving you. You get a better Arabic. In other words, it's a competition. I'm going to give you a better Arabic translation of what was given to me. And so there's already that internecine competition going on between the Arabists as to what is going to be derived, what is going to be the final copy. As we then of course, know that this really happened in the 9th century, when you have all kinds of different competitions and many different ways of putting it into Arabic. Great stuff. So here the Quran speaks for itself. And all you have done is just taken those verses. You've given us a litany of verses to chew on. We're going to use it now. And this is good because that then leads up into the next question. What then became the Islamic Quran? What was this Quran that was the product that came from these lectionaries, these homilies, these poems, these beautiful hymns? What then became that Quran? That's what you're going to go into next. Thanks so much. This has been excellent.
I just want to add something here. I haven't cherry-picked some verses that fit my explanation. This is not my method. What I did was looking at every verse every Quranic verse where there is a Quran or a QRA root. And this is what I got from the whole of the text, not a cherry picking collection of verses. So you see, I'm open to contradiction. I'm really okay with contradiction, with people telling me that we could explain this verse this way and this verse this way. But when you look at the whole of it, when you look at all of the occurrences, I think my hypothesis, the one I just explained, is the better one.
I think also, Odon, with the understanding that we're now coming into it from a completely different presuppositional base. Previously, whenever we looked at these verses, and I'm guilty of this as well, we've always assumed the standard Islamic narrative was correct. So we always took the standard Islamic narrative and we imposed it on these verses. And that standard Islamic narrative starts from the premise that this is an eternal book that is superior to that which has come before. That which has come before would be the Old and New Testament. So we've always assumed that narrative is what these verses are. What you're saying is, let's now look at these verses again, the same verses. Let's read them as they are. But instead of imposing the SIN onto it, instead of putting the standard Islamic narrative onto it, understand that this is actually talking about previous lectionaries, not scripture necessarily. These are recitations. These are homilies. These are proclamations. These are preachings. These are actually preachers who have taken a previous text that have been used all the time in the church services, all the time with hymns and homilies and sermons. Mm-hmm. That's what it's referring to. Now, if that is the case, then we need to look at these verses anew. And let's now interpret that presupposition onto it. And here's what you get. And you've done a great job of unpacking it. Thanks so much for that. This is the first time I've heard this kind of material applied to these verses in that context. And it makes absolutely good sense. Terrific stuff. Okay, listen. There's going to be some feedback. I'm sure we're going to get some kickback. Those of you who are listening to it, do kickback, do feedback, do give us your opprobriums or your salutations, whichever way you want to do. We want to hear from you. We will come back if there are some good material, that are good questions that we do need to answer or that we do need to spin off of. We will do that. Odin's always ready. We'll always wake him up and get him up and get his pipe smoking so that he can get the material well justified and also well answered. God bless you. Thanks for being with us, Odin. It's good to have you 4,000 miles away. This is Odin and myself. Over and out.